All right. We're 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend this fifth workshop. Um, we can go to the next slide, actually. We're going to be covering 4 different areas today. The first one is transmission. Pam Sporborg from PGE will walk us through those first slides. Then Ben Falconberry from Pacificor will talk with us about the compliance structure and reporting and transparency that's being proposed. And finally, Jim Shetler from Bank is going to cover some adjustments to the initial stakeholder process that we'll be making. And before we turn it over to Pam to talk about transmission, just a couple of housekeeping items. If people would like to make a comment, ask a question, if you could please use the raise hand function, I will unmute you. And if you would be so kind as to announce your name and the entity that you represent, that would be much appreciated. And with that, I think I can hand it over to Pam and we can go to the next slide.
So I'm going to talk about transmission, and Sarah, just a quick sound check to make sure you can hear me.
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Excellent. So it will come as no surprise that transmission is one of our core technical requirements for this program, but also one where we will need significant stakeholder feedback in order to find the right balance between the transmission demonstration and the availability of transmission widely in the West. Going on to our next slide. So we propose that the expectation for participation in this program is to demonstrate either firm, conditional firm, or network transmission from the generation source that is participating in the RA demonstration to the participating designated network load. We expect this to be identified in time for the final monthly compliance submittal, potentially 60 days prior to the compliance month, which will give us as much time as possible to secure the requisite level of transmission as additional transmission is potentially released closer to the date of compliance. While we as a group have strong consensus that this firm transmission right demonstration is an essential component of the overall resource adequacy demonstration, because it really means that there is the ability not only to acquire the generation to serve the load, but also to deliver that generation to the load, especially as our region becomes more transmission constrained. We have not reached a consensus on the amount of firm transmission or what the potential scope of that demonstration requirement should be. We are offering 75% as a starting point for the conversation, but we do recognize that that 75% is a proposed value and is not based on any type of study or other type of fact or study-based value. So we really want to just start with this value. I think it seems to be a general consensus point, but that we need to really dig into the deeper points along why this kind of demonstration is important. For example, one of the conversations that we've had as a working group is the evaluation of critical paths or legs that might have a different demonstration than other components of the program. For example, if there's a particularly constrained path between a generator and a load, there may be a different requirement for demonstration across that path compared to parts of the region where there is more transmission available generally, or where the transmission constraints have not been binding. For example, with Portland General Electric, the north of Pearl transmission constraint has become quite binding in recent years and is frequently results in transmission derates or the ability or the obligation to redirect in order to continue to serve load in Portland load pockets west of the Cascades. So that would be one example where we would have a critical transmission path. I think there's a lot of consensus that delivering from east of the Cascades to the west of the Cascades in the Northwest is a constrained delivery point. And so we're really looking at whether there are specific areas in the grid or constrained portions of the grid where we would want to have a different demonstration than this overall 75% starting point basis. We also would like to continue the conversation around that 75% demonstration and what that might entail and whether that seems to be the right value, recognizing the importance of transmission as the method of delivery of generation to support load resource adequacy and reliability. We also note that there are certain differences between a load that is served primarily from network transmission and loads that require, or generators that require point-to-point to deliver to that network load. And so we're looking at what type of requirements should be included for these different types of transmission. For example, for point-to-point, would OASIS transmission information be required to demonstrate a complete and feasible transmission path? So we're really looking at the details and the nuance here, rather than just starting with a simple 75% requirement. We'd like to have a lot of conversation and engagement from our stakeholders around whether these are the right values, how to approach the right value, and if there are nuances within the overall framework around particularly constrained paths or the differences between network and point-to-point transmission that would warrant additional nuance in this overall process. Next slide, please, Sarah. I'm going to go through the...
Yeah, I'm sorry, we've got a hand up. Let me unmute Jordan real quick.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. One thing I know, since this is early in the process, as a Jordan Garcia grid store, sorry about that. As a former sort of load serving entity, I think one thing that's really important and one thing that we were really concerned about, especially when EDAM came along, was secondary network, right? Which has its own designation, and we can argue back and forth about it. Is it as good as network service and all this stuff? But in some entities out in the West, right, when they're internal points and it's harder to get, I think there should be a special consideration for secondary network. Just wanted to throw that out there. I think it's really important and part of the toolkit, especially for commercial feasibility for everyone, something to think about moving forward.
Jordan, I really appreciate those comments. I think the network or secondary network is a nuance. I think if we wanted to get into the levels of transmission, we're looking at either a level 6 or 7, the firm or conditional firm, and secondary network is typically a level 6 or a conditional network, so that would also qualify.
Awesome.
Try not to get, yeah. Okay, on to the next slide, Sarah. So we also want to, really look at the exception process. We recognize that transmission is a very long lead investment opportunity, and transmission expansion can take years, if not decades, where some of our greenfield projects are over 20 years in from concept to the build and energization process. And so we do recognize that there will be points during the program where the demonstration that we find as a baseline requirement may or may not be met due to the need for transmission expansion in order for all participants to meet that threshold. So we are looking at what kind of exceptions or alternative compliance obligations we could include so that we are incentivizing the right behavior from our load serving entities that are participating in the program and giving them a path to a waiver from the requirements that we develop. So for example, we anticipate that participants could request exceptions from the transmission demonstration when there is constraint or not, or where firm or conditional firm transmission options are not available, or where an outage or a derate that is a more long-term outage or derate prevents the long-term compliance. So we'd like to create this waiver framework where we would have clear criteria and a process for evaluating exceptions, but also ensure that the requirements for receiving that waiver incentivize the right behavior. For example, participating in a long-term transmission queue and committing to take service as that queue moves forward and those upgrades are realized. And so that is, I think, the core of the transmission framework that we have. And as I've noted, we have a number of really important and differing opinions in our working group. And I will invite some of my working group members to share their perspectives on this framework and provide some of the context for those areas of consensus as well as disagreement in this process. So if you could, if our working group members could raise their hands so Sarah can find and unmute you, that would be great.
And I think Jim Shetler, I know that, there you are. I think you should have the ability to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Thanks. And thanks, Pam. As we look at this from a bank perspective, the bank is obviously made up of members who are all public power and load serving entities. And their focus is ensuring that they can serve the load of their customers. And part of that is ensuring deliverability of generation. So as we look at this, we feel that some form of a firm transmission requirement is essential as we look at making use of an RA program and the resources that are provided through that program. We're certainly open to dialogue around what is the right percentage at what point in time, but we do feel strongly that for our participation, that needs to be a factor or a feature of this program.
Thanks, Jim. And I think we also had, oh, wonderful, Spencer, and you should be able to unmute.
Thanks, Sarah. Spencer Gray with NIPSI, the Northwest and Intermountain Power Producers Coalition. The numbers of NIPSI involved in this RA work group are competitive retailers in Oregon who sell retail service to large commercial and industrial loads in Oregon. So I'm speaking here from the perspective, in this case, of transmission-dependent, non-vertically integrated entities. They don't own transmission in the West on a network basis. So that's the commercial perspective I'm sharing here. I guess the starting point for how we've thought about how this new program could include some kind of transmission requirement is first a recognition of the point Pam started with about the value of long-term investment in transmission from a variety of transmission users. But where we've gone with that, I guess, is retailers is a sort of different question for ourselves about the degree to which and sort of appropriateness of having an especially stringent transmission requirement as part of an RA program. In regional resource adequacy programs around the country, there's typically a different sort of bedrock, is how I've thought of it, for transmission than in the non-CAISO West. And that bedrock in other regions is consolidated transmission operations, a consolidated tariff, consolidated service, flow-based transmission, and some form of financial rights. So what we're contemplating doing and what the Western Resource Adequacy Program has done from our perspective, is kind of weird. We're sticking with a point-to-point contract path approach at the same time as we're trying to regionalize markets, which is obviously happening, and resource adequacy requirements as well. And so the perspective we have is bringing sort of a sense of humility about how stringent you can make in a regional program expectations for firm and conditional firm point-to-point rights from source to sink. What I want to share here, I guess, this morning is a bit of a different perspective, I think, from some of the from the transmission owner, certainly. Number one, the potential participants in this RA program start from really widely divergent positions. Those with full network transmission that are serving their native load using that transmission are really in a different place from transmission dependent entities. And I don't say that to suggest that the retailer load serving entities aren't willing to pay some kind of fair share and contribute to addressing transmission congestion and curtailments where they're happening. But we're hopeful that with dialogue with stakeholders and in the work group, we can land on a workable model, and frankly, from our perspective, a more workable model than we've had with RA in the last few years in the West. Pam mentioned the 75% number as a starting point. I've had trouble since that number was selected in the RAP, understanding why the number wasn't 74%, wasn't 70%, wasn't 80%. You have to land on something. So that's not to criticize the idea of having some number. But we would certainly appreciate a longer dialogue about what that right number is. But maybe more importantly, the universe of transmission segments that that metric applies to is perhaps even more important. And Pam's description of the idea of critical versus non-critical legs is very important to us as transmission dependent entities. There are parts of the grid where clearly there's persistent curtailment happening, congestion we can see. EDAM is going to demonstrate even more where those areas are, just as EIM's helped identify some of it. Distinguishing between the legs that we're the most worried about and that therefore deserve a more stringent treatment in the RA program is an important concept to us. And that changes the topology of where a transmission requirement potentially could apply across the West, rather than a universal source to sink every single leg from the southwest corner of EDAM's footprint up to the northeast corner, focusing in on using some kind of network analysis of where we're most concerned about transmission curtailment and congestion seems like the right approach to us. So we're eager to have that conversation. I just want to really put my finger on that distinction, I think, from prior efforts. And then two other points to share that are valuable to the retailer LSEs. Number one, the exceptions point that Pam mentioned. When you have an enduring constraint or curtailment on a transmission leg, one of the challenges with prior regional programs has been the ability to anticipate that exception occurring the next year and the year after that, because transmission takes so long to build and to upgrade. And so the conversation around how persistent you can apply for and expect an exception to the transmission requirements is very important to us. And then the last thing I would add is in states that do have a more complicated retail structure, like Oregon and like several other states in the West, the ability within that state to address sub-balancing authority LSEs, like the companies that I'm representing here, in conjunction with the balancing authorities is, I think, really important here. The cost of securing transmission is largely a flat cost. It's very different than going into the market and securing capacity or energy. And so some kind of mechanism for those critical legs that we hope the program focuses on for the LSEs to work with their host BA on some kind of pass-through basis if sitting in for example, a Bonneville transmission queue is what's expected. I think is an important mechanism. And I guess the distinction I want to make here is that is possibly a state-by-state approach that state regulators could be involved in facilitating and blessing. It may not apply in every state. Not every state has the same retail structure. So those are things we're looking forward to diving into here with other stakeholders and in the work group.
Thank you, Spencer. Appreciate that perspective. And Ben, you should be able to unmute now.
All right, thank you, Sarah. This is Ben Brandt with Idaho Power. Just a couple of things. As far as the 75%, the wrap number for deliverability once you're in the operations program is 100%. It's not 75%. That 75% is only related to the forward showing, and that is because some of that firm transmission or network transmission may not be available until sometime after the forward showing, but before the operations program. So just kind of echoing what Jim Shetler and some others have said, without deliverability, you don't really have what you need. So Idaho Power, it's definitely in the camp of we need some requirements around firm transmission and deliverability. So we're not quite sure how we would do that without, having some that's firm and some that doesn't have guaranteed deliverability, without the ability to maybe shed those loads that don't have, along with those transmission curtailments or something like that, to go ahead and keep things balanced. But from a reliability perspective, having the ability to deliver the energy is extremely important. So I guess that would be our position. Thanks.
Thanks, Ben. Eric Little, I see your hand, but before we get to you, are there any other work group members who would like to share their perspective or about other considerations that are important to them when having this transmission discussion?
Sarah, maybe we could move to the question slide so that our participants can start thinking about their responses to these questions.
Thank you, Pam. All right. While we give folks a moment to read through these questions, Eric Little, let me unmute you.
Thank you. Eric Little, CalCCA. It's just a quick question. On your first slide, you said network transmission from generation to load. Do you have a specific definition for that?
Yes, not off the top of my head, but network transmission is typically defined in either the OAT or in requirements.
Okay. The reason I asked the question is here in California, we have resources that are fully deliverable in energy only. And so I guess my question really comes down to, would you consider an energy only resource in California to have network transmission to be able to get to load outside of the state? Because right now within the state, we don't consider a resource that's not fully deliverable to be RA eligible. And if you did, that would cause a difference in balance between competitiveness between the systems. And as I've mentioned before, that's really where we're interested. So those definitions are important for us. Appreciate it.
Eric, I appreciate that nuance. I think that would be really helpful to articulate in comments, especially as I think that we're going to be looking at different definitions between kind of a flow-based system and the contract path system in the non-California West. So if that's something that you could help us understand through the comment process, I think that would be very helpful in making sure that we are looking at parity and thinking about deliverability on the same basis.
I have it in my notes. We'll include it in the comments. And if there's any questions on our comments, feel free to get in touch with us. We'd be happy to set up a meeting and talk to you about them.
That'd be great. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
All right, Max, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. This is Max Green for Renewable Northwest. That's something that's really more of a question or maybe just a topic for consideration as we collectively work through all this, which is kind of following up on something that Ben said a moment ago. I think part of the difficulty with the transmission requirement in RAP is the fact that even pegged to the forward showing, which is well in advance of operation, there are significant potential penalties attached to failing to make the showing. And this kind of shades into the next topic, but when we have the annual the proposal for the annual showing through this program is that it would be, I think the words in the design document are a requirement but non-binding and with no financial penalties. I'm wondering if folks have considered what it means for a transmission require for transmission to be a requirement in the annual showing when there is the compliance structure is kind of unclear at this point. And two, whether sort of from a participant's perspective, that takes some of the pressure off, at least relative to what we have in RAP. Just something that I'm trying to kind of think through right now. Once we get to the 60-day ahead monthly showing, it obviously seems to become more important, but it does seem to me that there's some interaction between what the transmission requirement is for the annual showing and then what the compliance structure is around that annual showing. So if you guys have thought through that and have anything you can speak to, that might be helpful. And if not, then I think we should all just keep it in mind as we move forward.
I think you're articulating one of the core challenges that that we have as a group between that long-term commitment to transmission is one of the foundations of ensuring that we're sending the right incentives to transmission providers and transmission owners around what transmission needs upgrades, what paths are important. How do we develop 10 and 20-year plans that ensure that the region is building the right amount of transmission to meet forecasted needs compared to some of the shorter term availability of transmission that may get released in a shorter time frame to firm up a program, or also some of the shorter term transactions that may support a more economic compliance from a generation perspective with RA. And so I think you're really highlighting exactly some of the same issues that are driving our statement around the foundation and the consensus that we do have as a group is that transmission is a critical component of a reliable resource adequacy program, but really asking some of those questions around what is the appropriate showing and demonstration during what timescale, across what paths, and in what amount. So appreciate your articulation there and looking forward to continuing that dialogue.
And Nick, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Pam. Nick Pappas, independent consultant. I wanted to ask sort of conceptually about the transmission requirement, if you all had considered other options. And the context of that question is just noting that transmission, so if you kind of back up and look at, I think Spencer got to this a little bit, but if you look at RAP and the CAISO RA program, there are already two dimensions of complexity, more complex than Eastern capacity programs. We have both the bilateral structure and a monthly structure, which with both add like a dimensional level of complexity. And I think one observation with RAP in the last couple of years as it started to come together and through some of the work that I've done in RAP participant or former RAP participant IRPs is that transmission rights layer is just an additional dimension of complexity that makes portfolio optimization and sort of like making deals happen both on a short-term basis and a long-term capital investment for resource basis really, really hard. So I don't ask this in the spirit of trying to wish away the transmission problem. It's a really significant problem. The topography of the system is super important. Just wondering if you've thought about whether there are other ways that could get at this problem, things like local requirements or zonal requirements that sort of drive participants to meet as much as they need to meet with local resources with some constraints on what they can show of sort of firm imported RA versus having to match every transaction with transmission rights in a way that just makes it much harder to say I'm going to make a 15 or 20-year investment in a project that's off system that I can't get long-term transmission rights to for 15 or 20 years. So would love to hear if you guys have thought about that, if those options are on the table, if there's any pathway to get there, or if we are going to be in that sort of three dimensions of complexity beyond the traditional capacity market situation that I think we've been finding ourselves in with RAP. Thank you.
And I think that's a really great question. And I'm trying to not say the word CRR because I'm sure that I said CRR or congestion revenue rights, and like half of my working group participants are probably have lit their hair on fire, and the other half are sitting there going, like, let's do that. So again, I think you are correct in that trying to overlay a resource adequacy forward showing program on top of a contract path OAT framework is really hard. And what we're trying to get at is to find the right balance in that framework. I think some type of long-term showing and commitment to transmission is critical, but there are such a diversity of participation models across the group. For example, with Portland General, building traditional resources and renewable resources west of the Cascades in our own service territory and load pocket is really challenging. And I think that's true for a lot of utilities that are located west of the Cascades. Just the kind of the generation to deliver to west of the Cascades typically is located in a different balancing authority or a different geographic location and requires that point to point to deliver. And there's not a whole lot of geographic options to get around that. Other participants may be less constrained and are more able to build in their own territories, and so can hopefully obviate that program by building on network. But just I think the complexity of the Western transmission system makes one-size-fits-all solutions really hard. And I think those same challenges and some of the winners and losers around within a point-to-point OAT system compared to what the Eastern RTOs have with a congestion revenue rights portfolio also make alternative arrangements really hard. So I think what we're trying to do is ground ourselves in the reality of today and not try to really really fundamentally try to transform both the transmission framework and the resource adequacy framework at the same time, but try to look at what our current framework can allow from a transmission demonstration perspective and help us move forward with the value of an RA program overlaid on the traditional OAT framework that we are operating under today. It looks like Nikki may have a response, and I think Bill and Spencer also probably have good perspectives there too.
And Nick, you should be unmuted again if you want to respond.
I just wanted to say thank you for that, Pam. I know this is a really hard problem. Say thank you and also just suggest, at this early stage of the program, if there are creative ways to think about reducing the dimensional complexity, maybe it's not this, maybe it's exploring the monthly component. I don't know that, capacity market versus bilateral is really on the table, but even thinking about how this interplays with things like an LOLE study NPRM that assumes kind of perfect transactability and optimization that requires kind of month-to-month optimization by LSCs. Just want to flag, I think this is a really important moment to just think through those components and the interplay as this gets into sort of the pillar space. But appreciate that response. I know it's a really hard problem, as I'm sure we're going to get into today. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Nick. Bill and then Spencer.
Okay, Bill Goddard. I'm with Calpine. Calpine is a retail provider. My first question might be a rhetorical question, really comes from I spent a couple of decades on the grid side. And, I look at a regional resource adequacy program for the transmission means to me, and I think it should mean to all of us, that at a extreme condition, high loads, all generations on to meet the load, does the transmission system hold together, or can it do that? And I think is there a study that says, I think you guys all kind of know where the constraints are, but do we have do we have any sort of appetite, or should it be required that we run some kind of regional flow-based study to say, here's the issues? Because it seems like getting at stuff in the queue and identifying that is not the most direct way to address the possible shortcomings of the transmission system. The second one is, I think there's a question of bifurcating any sort of incentives or penalties for transmission issues versus QCC capacity issues. I think they're driven by different causes. So I think that was one of the real problems with RAP, was a transmission deficiency was on the same footing as a capacity deficiency. And then the last point real quick is, I think, for somebody like Calpine Energy Services, we have embedded load with Pam over there in Portland and in Pacific or other areas. That load's going to be there in the balancing area service territory, whether we have it or not. If our contract expires and it goes back to Portland, it's still there. So I'd like to have a question, at least put it in the dialogue. How do we do this? How do we get us in the queue in the most effective way to manage this? And things like, do we go under an umbrella of what Portland has in the queue or Pacific Core? Because we're all going to be together at the end. Does that make more sense also in the terms? So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Bill. Spencer, go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. I wanted to respond a little bit more to Nick's good questions. Nick, I think we'd be happy to hear good ideas, both for sort of short-term solutions and medium or longer term solutions that we could aim for eventually. To Pam's point, we're not going to solely for purposes of RA change our entire transmission paradigm. But I think this exercise is spotlighting some of the challenges, and you described the, I guess, 3D dimensionality of it and ways to reduce that. So one would be kind of all ears for good ideas. Two, the use of WSPP Schedule C contracts widely across the West, and the success of delivering energy to large loads that rely on those contracting paradigms is something that we're wrestling with too. That it's not as though we're going from a system that doesn't have contracting mechanisms with contractual penalties attached that's successfully delivered power for decades in the West to suddenly having some kind of requirement. We're just trying to figure out how to do that in the RA context. So I just want to flag that in the work group, and I'd welcome stakeholder input on this too, the relative success, and it's obviously on a contractual basis, but relative historical success of those contracting mechanisms for deliverability purposes is something that we're weighing. And then finally, in terms of sort of reducing the complexity of this, the mechanism I mentioned of LSEs nested within a host balancing authority, having some kind of arrangement to address the really long time it takes to get through a transmission queue to actually get firm service can be a decade or more. And that's typically a longer term than the contracts that large loads on retail choice are willing to sign. And so for a retailer, the expectation to sit in a 10-year transmission queue to serve customers who are willing to sign a 2 to 5 year contract with you has not been very tenable. But we have thought of mechanisms, at least specific to Oregon, that might address that, which is something we'll be talking to our state commission about as well. But I offer that for other states that perhaps there are mechanisms to reduce that challenge for transmission dependent entities.
Thanks, Spencer. Before we move to our next topic, any other thoughts or reactions that folks would like to share? I'm not seeing any hands go up. You know, obviously this is a very important and complex design element, and this is again just really the start of the conversation. So I anticipate we will probably be having a summer workshop on this. So more to come, but thank you for everyone for at least kind of sharing these preliminary thoughts and considerations. And why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide? And Ben, if you could talk with us a little bit about what is contemplated currently for the compliance structure. We'll turn it over to you.
Just want to check the mic real quick. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, excellent. Well, this is Ben Falconberry from Pacificor. It's a pleasure to be in front of you again this morning. I will walk you through two subjects, the first of which is compliance structure. Let's go to the next slide, please. So here are the points we will be hitting soon. The concept of compliance submittals, binding months, a compliance determination, and operationalization of requirements. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a little bit of a review. You have seen some of this in previous workshops, but we will walk through it again here. So participants in the program are envisioned to have up to 13 submittals per year, 1 annual and up to 12 monthly submittals. The annual being due around about October 15th. That's just the starting point that we're putting in front of you. 90% of the requirement would need to be shown at that time. However, it would be essentially information only. This would be intended to provide visibility to stakeholders, kind of the health of the RA health of the region coming into the next year, and facilitate conversations around that. Obviously, there would need to be confidentiality kind of boundaries around that. We could talk with stakeholders about how we aggregate or how we communicate that data with sufficient detail to be useful, while at the same time preventing commercial harm from participants and their customers. Then there would be monthly submittals due 60 days in advance of the applicable month. 60 days was chosen as a starting point for your consideration to just acknowledge that things do take time, and to also leave some runway for any contemplated cure period or subsequent process that could help remedy a shortfall should one exist. In those monthly compliance submittals, 100% compliance would be expected, and without really providing much of a structure around it, this monthly submittal is intended to carry some financial risk, and that the nature of that risk is something that we would look to develop with stakeholders. So, just in case there's anyone kind of on the call thinking back to our design principles of minimizing administrative burden, And then also looking, well, okay, 13 submittals a year sounds like a lot. Um, Essentially, what could be possible is if an entity has sufficient capacity and can demonstrate compliance months in advance, then that could be done kind of in one fell swoop, and then just update that submittal as needed. So it's not, we're not saying 13, it's up to 13 submittals, right? If you're long and you're good, you can just kind of, you're envisioned to be able to set it and then just update if need be, should there be something like a force generator outage or a new contract or something along those lines.
Hey, Ben,
Yeah,
we've got a quick hand up, if you don't mind.
sure.
Hi,
Bill
Ben, Bill
Goddard.
Goddard, Calpine again. Quick question. The annual you have not intended to be binding, you talked about this as informational, but then the last bullet says the application of penalties TBD. Does that imply this is still an open issue, or do you mean application of penalties will be determined by the monthly submittals? What did you mean there?
Right. Fair question. So we're proposing the annual submittal not have penalties attached to it. However, we could hear from stakeholders that there's like a very strong desire to have some sort or form of penalty attached to this. But with the monthly submittal, that's where we're envisioning some kind of financial risk associated with a deficiency.
Very good. Thanks, Ben.
All
All
right.
right,
Let's
then.
go.
Yep.
Yeah, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so out the gate, we are proposing to have some months of the compliance year be binding and some not. However, we are not putting any specific months in front of you to serve as initial binding months. We would like these binding months to reflect risk where it truly exists in the region. And with the load and geographic diversity that we have in an envisioned footprint, there are some winter peaking systems and summer peaking systems. And so we would like an initial risk analysis to kind of reveal to us where the risk truly is and help that and have that data help inform where binding months would occur. However, we do recognize that the system itself is evolving as we add a diversity of resources to our regional mix, along with electrification, climate changing, and kind of hydrology shaking out a little bit differently for each of us. Having kind of that annual 12-month platform gets us all used to submitting the data and regional stakeholders seeing the data for the entire year, but allowing kind of the binding season or the binding months to shift within that year if needed. Looks like we got a couple of hands.
We do. Bill, I think this is an old hand, but double checking. Did you have anything further you wanted to ask? You should have the ability to unmute.
No, sorry, no. I'll lower my hand.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to double check. All right, Nick, go right ahead.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Ben. I have a couple questions. Maybe I'll start with the one and then pass it off to the next person. But Nick Pappas, an independent consultant. Ben, this question is sort of just to draw a nexus between the binding months concept and the discussion the other day about the PRM. And this isn't intended to be a trick question, but it might feel a little bit like that because it's turned out to be a bit of a trick question in other PRM requirement setting processes. So when we talk about binding months, like sort of let's say like a binding summer season, one of the key questions that's come up in other processes like this with monthly programs is what is sort of the conceptual intent? Like if you pick June through September or June through October as binding summer months, is the intent that the requirements as a function of the PRM are all of the resources that the LOLE study determined were necessary in the annual study for summer risk periods, or sort of like the full portfolio that was necessary to meet the 0.1 loss of load in summer? Or is there an intent for there to be some shaping over those summer months to correspond with sort of the scale of risk or what is perceived to be needed? So it's not probably exactly what you were targeting with this slide, but I think it's a key piece that fits with that. I would love your perspective on that. Thanks.
Sure. I would encourage any of the work group members on the call to kind of jump in and correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong. But if I'm understanding your question correctly, the monthly paradigm was selected to kind of help show the shape of the risk as you mentioned, and kind of prevent this phenomenon where the capacity having a flat seasonal capacity requirement, say, well, it just winds up being a bit too much in kind of the shoulder months of the season and potentially not quite enough during the peakiest periods of the season. So, that level of granularity is where we landed with regard to kind of letting the risk show up where it truly exists, if that's helpful at all.
Thanks. Yeah, it's the outage component is definitely a piece of this. If you have shoulder season months that you want to allow some outages in, but at least in sort of the CPUC program, and I think RAP has elements of this too, it's a little bit ambiguous what if you're thinking most of the risk is August and September, you need the full fleet in June. That's just sort of a conceptual question that has to sort of be determined, at least in the CPUC program and the CAISO program. There has been, effectively lower requirements for let's call it the portfolio nameplate capacity. I don't know. It's always tricky to get into the what denominations we're using here, but you require less of the portfolio in, let's say, June and October versus August, September, and that's a function of what the peak load is in those months, as well as, or it can also be affected by the counting conventions. Just flagging that these things all have to sort of fit together in a way that clicks. And so thinking about which months would be binding, how the PRM would be set for those months, if there's an intent or non-intent to sort of reduce the requirement in the months with lower peak load or coincident peak load or not, those are all questions that we've been navigating in similar RA programs. Thanks for the answer. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, I appreciate the perspective, Nick, and I guess I'll say we reserve the right to get smarter, right, as we go along and develop this. If there is an approach or data that kind of shows that this could be done better, we're absolutely open to it and incorporating it.
Thanks, Nick. And Elaine, go ahead.
Hey there. Thanks. Elaine Hart with Sylvan Energy Analytics. A question about maintenance outages with respect to the section of binding months. Like, one of the trends that we're seeing or emerging issues around the country is that we have sort of tighter supply during these shoulder periods, and especially with growing loads, it might be sort of like running out of space to do maintenance. So I'm curious. I think I remember that in the LLE study you weren't going to include maintenance outages, and so I'm wondering if there's a plan for sort of probing that question.
Yeah, at this point, as a starting point, planned maintenance would not be included in the LOLE study. I hear what you're saying, though. Those outages need to happen, even if they could conceivably be moved or, they are planned. And so I think as constraints become apparent, requirements and modeling assumptions could change if needed, should they pose a risk in themselves. If there are lessons learned regionally, I think we would happy to review those in the comments that we receive. on this section.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Elaine. Scott Olson, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, Ben, for the discussion on the geographic diversity piece, and appreciate you talking about summer peaking versus winter peaking utilities in the footprint. Do you envision there would be one set of binding months for the entire footprint, or would there be separate binding months, say, for winter peaking versus summer peaking, or some geographic split in the footprint if there was enough difference between where the peaks are, or seasonally where the peaks are?
So I think if there's a strong case to be made for that kind of bifurcation, would be happy to kind of read through it in the comments. But I guess my initial reaction, and I don't want to say that I'm speaking for the entire group, is that the kind of uniformity of requirements for all participants helps keep the entire footprint whole throughout the binding seasons. And so should there be winter risk in the footprint, then there would be, a winter requirement for the entire footprint, not just a subset. But obviously, we could hear from stakeholders and incorporate feedback.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
All right, Ben, no more hands.
Yeah. Sure, we can move on. Okay, so a lot of this is a review here. So for non-peak or shoulder months, there would be an expectation that data would be provided, and that participants would aim to meet their RA kind of metrics for that month. But as a starting point, we're not envisioning a 12-month program, and so this would be information only. And then over time, as risk shifts, it shows up at different times, different areas, and different parts of the year. Participants are envisioned to be made aware of that shifting risk, and the flexibility would remain within the program to change the binding periods. And that could also mean expanding them to all 12 months if necessary. That's all I have for this slide. And so I guess for those who are hoping to find out more about a penalty framework or something along those lines, this is perhaps a slight letdown here. Essentially, just understanding that a penalty framework reaches far and wide in its ramifications. And so we are hoping to develop this along with stakeholders. And I think in our comments, we would really be interested in hearing about how a penalty framework kind of interacts, and the incentives or disincentives RA penalties have kind of created elsewhere. And if there are any lessons learned with those. So essentially, we do intend for there to be some sort of like compliance mechanism here. We don't have a definition for you today. All right, let's go to the next slide if there's no hands. And then finally here, we do want to hear from stakeholders about ways to operationalize forward RA compliance. So I even have to remind myself that within this context of this RA program, each individual LSE will be within a balancing authority area that has a resource efficiency evaluation placed upon it by way of EDAM participation. Now, each BAA is going to apportion that RSE requirement down to its LSEs in the way it sees fit, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that each LSE will have some role to play in helping its host BA pass its RSE. So we would like to hear from stakeholders if there are any great ideas out there about how to operationalize forward RA requirements to basically assist those LSEs in passing their part of the RSE, because that's kind of where we see the forward RA requirements kind of coupling up with market participation. If there is a differing view, or if you think that kind of paradigm isn't right, if we should be thinking about this differently, please let us know either now or in the comment period. But this is something that we would like to develop with stakeholders. We don't have a lot of details for you at this time. All right, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so really, if you have any thoughts on the preceding material, go ahead and shoot your hand up. I won't read these questions to you, but we'll give you a moment to think about them.
And we will continue to pause to give folks a few more moments to see if anything bubbles up. All right. Bill and then Elaine.
Yeah, Bill Goddard, Calpine. Ben, just looking at what we're expecting here, some unlocking diversity, bilateral trading, what's available. Do you anticipate requiring some sort of a must offer in certain months so that we can unlock if people actually have extra that they could trade, or not? Or is that an issue?
I think that's one way to go, right? With ensuring that forward requirements are available to be optimized, right? That if you think kind of over to wrap the forward showing requirement kind of translates to the must offer for Markets Plus. Obviously, we're in a different market here with its own kind of fundamental differences in how it assesses reliability requirements. I think if that's a concept that's appealing to Calpine, I think we'd be interested in hearing that, or even others.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bill. And Elaine, go right ahead.
Thanks. I'm just looking at this last bullet point, and I'm wondering if you can say anything more about what this analysis regarding regional transmission connectivity might consist of.
So I believe that this kind of refers to not necessarily something that's happening in this moment, but a study kind of contemplated by Pam, Spencer, others previously, kind of like where are the constraints in the region, and letting that kind of study, I guess, inform forward requirements. I think we're also asking, what do stakeholders think that type of study should include.
Fair enough. Thanks.
Thanks, Elaine. Eric, go right ahead.
Hey, Eric Little, Cal CCA. I'm sorry if I missed this on the last page. I saw the discussion about the RSE failures. So capacity really doesn't have any value. It's the energy from the capacity, right? So how do you plan to get to the energy from that? Is there going to be a must offer obligation if you're an EDAM entity, or is there some other way of getting at the energy for this? Sorry if I missed it.
No, you get that's kind of the question that we're posing to stakeholders now is translating. So the program conceivably, creates these monthly forward RA requirements. How do you take those forward requirements and operationalize them in an EDAM framework, right? Within EDAM, each BAA has its own resource efficiency evaluation that it must pass, and the RSE looks only at the BAA and it's intended to ensure that the BAA can kind of pull its own weight in the next day. And so, what's an appropriate linkage between this program and those EDAM requirements? I mean, that's what we're posing to stakeholders. So we're not yet at a stage of proposing a must offer. We're kind of posing to stakeholders the question: would a must offer be the right approach here, or is there something else we should try to cobble together in the EDAM context?
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. And then a similar question on the transmission. So if somebody's got firm transmission, there's certain circumstances in which they want to use that firm transmission to serve their own load. There's certain circumstances in which they have it simply to meet this obligation. How do you tell the difference between those two and what happens to that transmission, right? Because the ISO uses any surplus to be able to operate the EDAM market. Is that something that you're looking for comment on as well, or is that something that you've figured out?
We have definitely not figured it out. If you have comments or perspective, we'd love to hear them.
All right, excellent. Ben, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, this is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I just wanted to make a brief comment on whether to have a MOO or not. I always thought this is one of the most interesting things when RA programs are developed because of the connection to the energy market. So I think there are two broad thoughts in the design. And one is that if you decide to commit the full RA under a must offer, it ends up lowering energy costs. So if you are looking into, who's going to participate, what are the benefits, sometimes committing more RA actually ends up lowering total costs because you don't get into scarcity as often. And there's been lots of studies on that you could look up, like when SPP created their first day two market, they did kind of an analysis on, this is like 15 years ago now, whether to have a full MOO or not. And then if you think about, okay, you have a lower MOO, you're just meeting your RSE. Well, if you're just meeting it, sometimes you're in near scarcity events. So you get really high energy prices. So that's a pretty big trade-off. But then as a generator, you get more flexibility to do like programmatic arbitrage. And maybe you're not needed to meet the RSE, so you can go sell to markets plus, and as a generator, you're better off. So those are just kind of two high level, I think, ways to think about whether to have a full MOO or not. And it might be worth it to think kind of, for the participants, what are you looking for? Are you looking for more flexibility, or are you looking for kind of lower energy costs in a full program? I think that's not something, I don't know, we could answer for you, but I'd be really interested in hearing, from potential members, kind of what the benefits to you would be of either of those. Thanks.
Thanks, Carrie.
Any other thoughts before we move to our next topic? All right, don't see any hands, so I think we can go to the next slide, please.
All right, reporting and transparency. So this is our final topic today and final topic of the spring workshops. Let's move to the next slide. So I'm going to put two reporting concepts in front of you. The first of which is the RA metrics report. So essentially what this would be is on an annual basis, the program service provider would present RA study results and forward metrics, including PRM values, ELCC study results, all the way up to the row board of directors. However, prior to that, so basically so that everybody isn't seeing these all for the very first time, ahead of such report, the program service provider would present these results to the technical oversight committee and potentially a broader audience to help facilitate a technical discussion. Sometimes, as many of you know, RA metrics come out a little bit like in an unexpected way, or they look a little different than perhaps they had in the past. And so kind of being able to have a discussion around that and have some of those reactions and answers ready for when they get reported up to the row board is what's being envisioned here. So that is one report. Let's go to the next slide. And the second would be an annual report. So in the work group, this concept of maintaining transparency, program agility, and accountability kind of kept coming to the surface in something along the lines of an annual report where the program service provider alongside the technical oversight committee report to the row board on the status of the annual compliance submittal and basically what is the health of the region coming into the next year. Additionally, at that time, any other reports or topics, performance results and the like that the regulatory advisory group or the directors would like, board of directors would like to see at that time is something that would be presented in the spirit of transparency and accountability. So really, this is, open-ended for the time being. We would be looking to these groups to help shape what this annual report looks like. And let's go to the next slide. And so really, that's what we have. I mean, we have heard loud and clear that transparency and data are critical for stakeholders. And so we would like to know what else the region would like to get out of any programmatic reporting. So again, I'll give you a moment to read through these questions, and please raise your hand if you've got a response.
And we will wait a few more moments to see if folks have any reactions to any of these questions posed. Carrie Bentley, go right ahead.
This is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I just wanted to applaud the dedication to transparency. That is entirely crucial, I think, not just to keep everyone aware of what's going on, but also for price formation. If you don't know basic facts, like what's the requirement for everyone, how much supply is out there, it's very hard for a market to function. And you are ultimately setting up a bilateral market. So I think the more information in the most easily accessible form, the better. So that means not PDFs, great. Like the ability to actually download the data would be incredibly helpful. And then on how frequent the information would be reported, I would like to twist this a little bit. For me, it's not just annually versus quarterly, but how close to the event occurring are you then publishing the data afterward? Like if you do an annual report and then you wait 6 months to publish it, like we see in some markets, that's less helpful than timely, continual publication of data. So whether it's a quarterly or annual report, I think the timeliness is probably the most critical factor for us. And then if there is any way to do closer reporting monthly, quarterly, that's better too. But again, thanks so much. I really appreciated how much the paper talked about transparency and how important it was.
Thanks, Carrie.
All right. Thank you.
And Nick, go right ahead.
Hey, Ben, Nick Pappas, independent consultant. I had to step away for a moment for a call, so stop me if this was already covered. But separate from this ex post performance and compliance information, what's the vision for release of data, ex ante data from things like the LOLE study, sort of assessment of the baseline list or aggregate for procurement information? I think sort of similar to the spirit of Carrie's question. I mean, I think for both participants and the market to supply needed resources, the more information at a sort of in an aggregate form in a way that doesn't compromise anyone's confidential positions is really going to be helpful in getting these long lead time investments underway to serve necessary load. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll say, I mean, we kind of approach this whole section as like an all call to stakeholders, what would be helpful and what would be beneficial to the region. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess if there's a structure that you're kind of envisioning, please let us know in the comments.
Great. Thanks, Ben.
I don't see any additional hands, but I will pause just another minute to see if any last ones go up. And we do have time at the end too for additional comments, thoughts, or questions, if any come up in the meantime. But no additional hands, so thank you, Ben, for walking us through these two sections. We will transition to our final topic, and we can go to the next slide. And Jim Shetler is going to talk with us about some adjustments that we will be making to the initial stakeholder process.
Thanks, Sarah. Can we get the next slide, please? First of all, on behalf of the sponsors and the work group, I want to extend our appreciation to the stakeholders for your engagement, discussions that you've had throughout these workshops, and the input that we received so far. And we're definitely looking forward to receiving your written comments here. But one of the things that we've determined is, as we walk through the workshops, is that this input is helping us better understand where the stakeholders are relative to design elements, and also is indicating to us the need for some further dialogue and discussion. And our goal is to hopefully be able to present something to the row board that has as much stakeholder support as possible. Ideally, everybody, but we recognize there may be issues that are still outstanding. But we'd like to make sure we've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's to make sure that we've tried to address issues as much as possible. So with that in mind, we're looking at readjusting the timeline for moving forward. Could you present the next slide, please? So first of all, in order to support this, we're going to extend the written comment period by a week. So rather than the June 10th date, we're looking at June 17th for written comments. Hopefully that'll allow you some additional time to to digest what you've heard over the course of the workshops and provide written comments. The other thing we've decided is, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we feel there's probably a need for more dialogue before we try to throw an initial proposal out there. So instead of providing an initial proposal this summer, we're looking at making use of this summer for another round of stakeholder workshops. And we anticipate that these will be try to delve in a little deeper on some of the key subjects that we've talked about, informed by the comments we've received and the written comments that we hope to have gained from you. And to make those a little more, as I said, in depth and trying to get to where design elements should be. The intent then would be to do an initial draft proposal by the September timeframe, based on the results of these detailed stakeholder workshops. Allow another round of stakeholder input and comment, and then have a revised draft that we could present to the row board by the end of this year. And with the current timeline on the selection of the row board, we think having a document available to them by the end of the year is probably timely. Not much sense in trying to push for something earlier than that. So that's our revised schedule, and we hope that provides a little more opportunity for the stakeholders to help us develop that final, or not final proposal, the draft proposal for submittal to the row. Comments or questions? I think I will turn it back to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Jim. We can go to the next slide, please. So next steps, comments. The verbal feedback that we've received throughout these workshops has been very helpful. But what will be probably even more valuable is getting that feedback documented from you all. So really what we're looking for in a few different categories, directional feedback on what's been proposed so far. So as you're drafting comments, consider what proposal elements that you've heard to date that you support and would like to see move forward. And on the flip side, what proposal elements, if adopted, that have been proposed so far, could pose challenges. If there are any other issues that haven't bubbled up that would be helpful for the RA sponsors and work group to think about as we consider and kind of go into these deeper levels of design, please provide those in comments. And then finally, if there are any specific topics that you all would like to see this group hit during the summer workshops, that would also be very helpful to add to comments as well. And as Jem mentioned, the comment deadline has been extended by a week. So that new comment deadline is Tuesday, June 17th. You can send written comments to resource adequacy at rowesternenergy.org. And we can move to the next slide. Oh, Nick, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jim. First, I just wanted to say thank you. That I think the extra time is really appreciated as someone who's been speaking up probably more than I should, but thank you for that. I just wanted to ask, Jim, you may have touched on this. Are you planning to issue sort of a revised, deeper, more detailed version of the straw proposals between the first round of comments and the subsequent workshops? And I raise that in the context of when we've done similar exercises in other RA programs, CAISO, CPC, RAP, et cetera. It's always helpful to sort of see how the pieces fit together, especially as we kind of click into that next level of detail that can really inform how the other pieces fit.
Thanks for that feedback, Nick. We haven't necessarily laid that out in detail yet. I do anticipate we will probably issue updated concept papers like we have to date. But let us take that input and decide. We're actually meeting later this week to talk about how do we want to start moving that forward. So I appreciate that feedback.
And Nick, that's a perfect segue into this next slide. So what will the summer look like? As Jem mentioned, we're going to be doing some scoping quite soon, and to figure out specifically what workshop topics and then what the schedule will look like over the summer, and then also to what is going to be the most expeditious or efficient way to provide kind of that second version and kind of maybe go a level deeper in the different design elements to stakeholders. So these workshops can be as effective as possible. So sort of more to come. However, on June 25th, I believe that's a Thursday from 9 to 11 Pacific, 10 to noon Mountain, we are going to hold a workshop just to provide people an idea of really what they could anticipate the summer looking like. So at that point, we should have more of these details nailed down, and then we will communicate that out so everyone can hopefully participate as thoroughly as possible. And that wraps up our next steps. I think we can go to the next slide. And hopefully this slide, where to find materials, is starting to look familiar at this point. Everything is posted on the webpage. And again, just as a reminder, the Row isn't sponsoring this initiative or this initial stakeholder process. They are kindly lending us the use of the webpage to provide materials and post links to this workshop. But again, they are not a sponsor of this effort. And we can move to the final slide. We have about half an hour left. If there are any topics, thoughts, questions, comments that people would like to make before we wrap up. And Bill, I see your hand. Go right ahead.
Yeah, Bill Goddard at Calpine. But short question, just I'm seeing the meeting for the EDMRA transmission subgroup tomorrow. Is that the first meeting? How are these run? Is the idea that smaller group is going to get even smaller groups so you can really get a lot of work done, and then you bring these back up to a larger meeting to resolve this? Does anybody have any feelings of how these subgroups are going to work?
Yeah, Ben, that's actually an internal meeting to the work group, so we can take that one offline and
Fine.
provide
Okay.
more detail there. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Mhm. Any other hands before we wrap up? Nick, go ahead.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Just in the vein of Bill's recommendation, I do think there were a few topics that came up over recent workshops that are big, meaty topics that many of us have lost many hours of our lives to in workshops over the course of months. I do think it would be really maybe useful to have some sidebars with folks, particularly folks who've been participants in some of these other programs, just to kind of get some lessons learned, get some perspectives. I know you're hearing a lot from a lot of folks, but to have maybe a targeted uh, workshop or maybe just opportunity for conversation and feedback, particularly with California market participants and regulators from the commission program, from certainly thinking of some folks I've collaborated with in RAP or former RAP participant IRPs from the sort of the planning side. Might be good to just sort of pressure test some of this stuff as we continue to go forward and digest some of this feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. It's a great suggestion. I'll give one final pause. Okay. Well, again, just really want to echo I think what Jim said, thank you so much for everyone dedicating the amount of time you have to date just for the spring workshops. We very much appreciate and look forward to your written comments. If anyone has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll try to get responses back as quickly as possible. But with that, I think we will wrap up and then hope to see everyone on June 25th for kind of the next steps workshop as far as what the summer will look like. Thank you, everyone. Take care.